changing at breathtaking speeds, with trends and fads popping up and passing away at breakneck pace. Against that backdrop of nearly constant upheaval, we welcome you to the Sunday Scotch Society. Over delectable, sumptuous scotches and with the occasional good cigar in hand, we have open, honest, and uninhibited conversation about whatever strikes our fancy. Whether it's the critical issue of the day or a deep dive down the rabbit hole, we take it all seriously while having a good time. Join us for a stiff drink and a great conversation. Folks, welcome to the Sunday Scotch Society. I am, of course, your inimitable, intrepid, and also mildly fluffy host, Quincy Parker. My co-host, as usual today, my partner in crime, Matthew Kelly, is also here.
Oh, wonderful day to you.
And Matthew has this unfortunate practice, in addition to twiddling himself, of greeting us with an accent, and then when the accent is batted back to him,
Gone.
it's gone. So
One serve only.
there you go. I don't know if I like that. That's a why, right? So today we're going to be talking about the orange economy. That's something that both Matthew and I are very interested in.
That sounds tasty.
Yeah. I remember reading the IDB's report on what the orange economy was and is, and as a creative individual myself and a creative entrepreneur, I just thought it was such a strange way of looking at economics and looking at business development, but also it seemed to me so natural and so intuitive. And so I'm really excited about our conversation today, because this is the thing that governments in the Bahamas have talked about exploiting and promoting and developing and assisting for decades. But I would almost be willing to take a bet that any entrepreneur who works in the orange economy would take a fairly strong oath to say that sector of the economy has not been well served by our public policy. We'll see if I'm the only person in the room who says that, but I think that's where I want to start. Our guest today is a consultant and a communications guru. She's someone that I respect tremendously, and I look at her as a kind of mentor without paying her for her mentorship. And her name is Royanne Dean. Royanne of Onward Consultants Limited. No, Onward Advisors
is
the company, yeah. Hi, Royanne, welcome.
Hi, Quincy. Hi, Matt.
How are you?
I'm great.
This conversation is the first one that I really wish I was videotaping, because both Matthew and Royanne are face people. See, this is what I mean. This is what I mean by face people. They're looking at each other with both of their eyes torn wide open, like, what do you mean face people? What I mean is a part of conversing with you, a part of relating to you, is reading your facial expressions and reacting to the nonverbal cues. So when we have you back, Royanne, and we're going to have you back, we're going to video record that particular show. So I'm looking forward to that. This is where you either object or sign a waiver of consent.
I'm just waiting for the gifts to come out.
Okay. See, they're also okay. Anyway, they're too smart for me and they're too quick. So this is. I feel like I'm going to be playing catch up the whole episode. So that's probably why I'm excited about today's whiskey. It's one that I could talk about in my sleep. When I was a little boy, no, I wasn't really a little boy. When I was about 19 or 20, I was stuck reading fiction by a Catholic priest named Andrew Greeley. And Andrew Greeley wrote a series of detective novels featuring a priest, Father Blackie, as the subject, I guess the protagonist of his novels. And Father Blackie drank this thing called Jameson Irish whiskey.
You sure he wasn't Anglican?
No, he was
Hold on.
very much a Catholic. And so when I saw a bottle of Jameson Irish whiskey in a liquor store one day, I was like, let me try this thing. Mm-hmm. And so I went, I bought a bottle, I poured it, not the whole bottle, obviously, and I took a sip, and that began my journey into whiskey and Scotch and that sort of thing. So Jameson is it's sort of a synecdoche for me for coming of age as a whiskey drinker, as a dipsomaniac, as a tippler, those sorts of things. So I'm excited about sharing it with you guys today. It's not a rare single malt Scotch type situation. This is just flat out, in my view, it has an emotional and sentimental value for me, but I also happen to think it tastes really nice. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to pour our first shots of Jameson's for the day. A good finger, maybe a finger and a half for certain people. This way, not that way.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Because this way, a finger and a half is a problem.
Yeah, I was like...
I immediately see strategy on the part of Quincy. Our guest has 2 fingers. I have 1.
Oh.
For the record, our guest's glass is different. It only looks like our guest has more than us. In fact, our guest has less.
Yes. No, it is.
Yes, it's a conical. Yeah.
Please, I don't want you giving people the impression that I'm trying to get Royanne drunk. Good Lord. What kind of impression would you be giving?
Moi?
Toi? Matthew likes to experiment with the nose first. But this is a this is a drinker's whiskey.
That is County Cork.
County Cork? What does that mean?
This is where it's from.
Oh, okay.
That is, let's just say the Irish have a reputation for being familiar with Jameson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
your last name is Kelly, right?
Indeed. I'm going to see with the heritage.
Mm-hmm.
What's it? Oh.
And there it is.
Oh, that is nice.
Therein lies the rub.
That is pairing with my name quite nicely.
Mm-hmm. But it's the first thing you smell, because it's whiskey, is the alcohol. Mm-hmm. But once you let that dissipate a little bit,
yes,
you get for me, the Irish whiskey is a lot less intense in terms of aroma than the Scotches. Irish whiskey is a little more subtle. It's not about like smoke or peat or any of those things. It's much more about an expression of the spring water and then however the barley is malted to create the whiskey. And Jameson is, to me, smooth, and it has that, I like to, what I refer to as a warm, almost buttery kind of rummy, feel of roundness in the mouth as opposed to sharpness in the mouth. And it has, to me, flavors of, there's bread, there's a little brown sugar, there's maybe a fruit of some kind, like a hint of, you said this last time, I think pear was a good one, but it's not really complex. It just, to me, tastes really good. And as we go through the conversation, I think it'll open up a little more. And, well, that's my impression. Let's get Royanne's thoughts on it.
I can smell the brown sugar, caramelly.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a base, but that's like the forward scent.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I think I could use a little time to let the alcohol burn off a little. That's it's like super strong alcohol type.
Yeah, it's almost 90. It's almost 90, 94, 95.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
I have to say I'm quite surprised. I thought it was going to be way more alcohol forward than it is.
Yeah.
Sort of buttery, like almost a butterscotch sort of feel, like a hint of pepper.
Mm-hmm.
That is going on the roster.
Okay.
I figured it would.
So I got one question before we get into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
As I continue this journey of learning about whiskey, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've come across this concept of legs.
Yeah.
So now as I swirl this and I watch the drain come back down, I'm beginning to appreciate the differences in the liquid as it comes back down to the main body. Do you ascribe anything to this at all, or is it just for the real critics or foo-foos?
All right. So before we started recording the conversation, earlier we were talking about the difference between gourmet and gourmand.
Yeah.
Right. To me, legs is a conversation for gourmets. Especially, it's a conversation for gourmets when they're talking about wine or wine products. I don't associate the legs conversation with whiskey or Scotch, personally. That's my answer to that question. I'm sorry, but these are the things. So, in addition to Jameson,
I'm learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're all learning. Ooh, I was about to get in trouble just now, but I'm going to pivot and go in the other direction. Royanne, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is home to some of the most incredible storytellers in the world. In my view, we are naturally gifted at storytelling, whether that is sitting around a domino table building a story about something that happened or is happening, whether that is fiction, creating an idea and following it through, whether that's telling lies, whether that is in any number of different ways that we tell stories. I think that's something that is innate to us and special about us. And I wonder sometimes why it is that we have not, or how it is that we have not necessarily figured out how to monetize and create an economy out of what is, to me, one of our strongest indigenous traits. And the reason I wonder about it, I started to think about what is it about Jamaicans that makes reggae and jerk chicken so exportable? What is it about Bajans that makes crop over something that people around the world know about, right? People are starting to know about Junkanoo. But that's a result of a conscious tourism push as opposed to the fact that communities around the world find this art form compelling and are excited by it.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, do we take the arts and artistic accomplishment seriously enough, especially in the current moment in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas?
Do you mean, okay, do you want to be, specifically?
Here's why I'm asking.
Well, you don't know, not so much the why, but like, how do you mean seriously? Like, what's the context?
Seriously as in, okay, do we place value as a community on artistic expression and accomplishment? And if we do, what does that look like? And if we don't, what would it look like if we did? When I say value, I'm talking about, can I, as somebody who is a creative person, whether that is I'm creative with the way I use my hands, I'm creative with the way I use my voice, I'm creative with the way I use my eye, whatever the case may be, can I go to the marketplace, put my thing out, whatever my thing might be, and can I expect the market to respond to me in a way that is positive, reasonable, acceptable, even possibly exciting? And if I can, then how do I expand on that? Right? And if I can't, is it the government's responsibility to make it so that I can't? It's a long, sort of a complicated question, but it's to me, it's kind of at the heart of the orange economy question.
Okay.
Now you may disagree, but at least this is where I want to start.
So, I think let's start by explaining like the orange economy, right? Because what you're speaking about is one component.
For sure.
It's not the entire economy, which means that the answer that I give, if I reply to your question directly, is only going to address one issue, which is a part of the orange economy, but the issue itself isn't like the whole conversation, right? So, all right, so what is the orange economy? The orange economy is an economy that's really based on intellectual property. So it's based on creativity. So creativity, means you're just finding new ways to show things, demonstrate things, or new ways of being. And that is intellectual property, right? So yes, there's a cultural component to the orange economy, which is where the arts come in, design, all those things that we consider as creative fields and creative industries, generally speaking. But the orange economy, creative industries and orange economy is kind of used interchangeably. The orange economy also considers other areas that require intellectual property. right? So my area of marketing is also considered a creative industry. Architecture is considered a creative industry. There's a design component to architecture, but people don't think of that as part of the orange economy. It is, right? And this is based on just a broader definition of what creative industries are. But what that encompasses is if you are in an area where you are creating like a new property, you're not necessarily inventing something, maybe, but that's not the only definition, right? You're coming up with something that you created and that's your property. So that's a very like reductionist concept of the orange economy, right? So to look at your question specifically about, let's say the arts, but let's say the cultural component, period, right? Because the arts is one way, but that can even be broken down into performing arts, visual arts, you know.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, do we take it serious? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say the question. We love rabbit holes here, so I'm quite happy to go down the arts rabbit hole, but I don't think that's actually not my question. My question as regards to the value that the market places on the orange economy, it was not necessarily limited to just the arts.
Yeah.
I use the arts as a stand-in for the broader conversation.
Okay. So there's a couple things at play here. We have to look at the context, I would say, in this particular situation, also of our culture as a country. So I think we enjoy the arts, right? We enjoy Junkanoo. It's a very serious part of our culture, given the amount of time and money that people spend on creating costumes and just being a part of a group as like a way to identify culturally with where you're from, at least in New Providence, right? And who your people is. So we enjoy the arts, we appreciate it to that extent, right? Our ability to understand the economic potential in that industry, I think, is still being discovered, right? So understanding the economic potential means that you have to understand what is the value in terms of what goes into it and where should the market value it, right? So your question about does the market put enough value on it? I would say it depends. And the reason why I say that is because people put a high value on Junkanoo, willing to pay for Junkanoo tickets, willing to spend money on materials, you're willing to go out there at a time that you probably would not be going downtown and sit out there for hours and hours, right? So that's a value that people place on it from a Bahamian consumer perspective. However, if you look at other areas in the cultural industries, maybe we place less value on it. And I say that in the context of, let's look at that in the context of our culture, is because we are pretty much spoon-fed U.S. culture, right? Which means, for example, if you are listening to the radio and you hear, for every 10 songs you hear, 6 of them are American, 2 Jamaican, 1.5 Arabian, right? You're exposed to it less, you're hearing less, which means that the value of that particular art form or that particular genre is less. It's only, it's just human nature. The more you hear things, the more you come to identify with it, the more you think it's of a greater value, right? So I think it's not a black and white question to say, do we value it? Just in that context. However, the other type of market receptiveness comes from the fact that just because you're creative and you go out there and you make something, if you stand out in Rawson Square with your wood carvings, people might stop, but how are you selling yourself, right? So this is like a multifaceted a multifaceted conversation.
And
You asked if the government, if it's the government's
that's where
responsibility.
I'm going right now. Yeah.
It's not the government's responsibility. The government does bear some responsibility, but if I think about it from a business perspective, that particular person, if they decide that that's how they want to make money, regardless of if they go along the path of entrepreneurship or if they decide this is a hobby that they're going to do on the weekends, they want to make some money. You have to think about this from the perspective of, is what I'm doing actually good? How am I selling it? If it's something that you are selling per unit or per experience, is this worth in the market what I'm charging for it? How do I make this a more valuable item, right? That's one thing. The other side of that, from the government perspective, is creating the policies that allow or enable people who are creative entrepreneurs to get the necessary support. And that support can be in funding programs, that support can be in the ability to either export their art or their products or whatever their IP is in a way that makes other markets accessible and makes what they're selling accessible to people who are not here or people who are here, right? So it's a double edge, but I would say it's not the responsibility of the government. The government should enable it, but really, in most countries where you see the creative industries thrive and the creative economy, orange economy thrive, it's driven by private sector engagement, but government enabling through policies and some kind of support, but creating a like an environment for it.
Yeah, and that's the question, right? Sometimes in the Bahamas it's difficult to have blunt questions and blunt answers to questions to subjects that are somehow going to impinge on, did the government do a good job? Mm-hmm. And the reason I think that is the case is because we've gotten to the point in our development where government and political party are synonymous now, mm-hmm. right? And so the question of, did the government do a good job, has been, it is heard as, did the political party that was in power at the time do a good job?
Yeah.
Regardless of the fact that every prime minister, every cabinet minister, every member of parliament who gets up in the House, who serves the people of the country in a position that was previously held by some other Bahamian, mm-hmm. says government is continuous. Mm-hmm. We as a broader community, we don't seem to accept that.
Yeah.
The reason that I bring it up in that context is because government as a continuous entity mm-hmm. has attempted to create that enabling environment, mm-hmm. or at least they have said that they are creating that enabling environment yeah. for the orange economy, yeah. For the creative industries, right? Mm-hmm. And as someone who participates, have they succeeded?
I don't know that they've succeeded per se, but I don't know that you could point to any government that you can say that they've succeeded. The first point is that did we define what success was? Did we define that? I don't think that we have. The second thing is that what are we using as a benchmark? So mm-hmm. the question about did they succeed or not succeed, I mean...
Okay, so let me push back on that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
For every political administration mm-hmm. that has addressed the issue, mm-hmm. the question of success is always, mm-hmm. did the policy that we propose and then implement have the result that we said it would have when we proposed this policy?
Okay.
And without the reason that I'm trying to do it this way is because I don't want this to be perceived as a political conversation.
Yeah, I
right?
understand.
But it is not fair to say that we have not defined success. Each political party that has put forward a plan to quote unquote help the orange economy has defined success by saying when we do this, this will happen. In my view, and I'm going to be clear that this is my view, and not the view of Matthew Kelly or of Roy Andine or of Guardian Talk Radio, who will be airing our conversation. This is the reality is that we can judge from the development of the sector itself whether those policies as implemented succeeded on the face of it.
Okay, so I hear you, but I would add this. The fact that there may be something in a manifesto about the creative economy or orange economy doesn't mean that that's a policy, right? And to be candid, I don't know which governments have proposed and therefore proposed policies that have been, I don't know, policies get passed, whatever, that are implemented, right? I don't know. So that's why I'm saying I don't know how are we measuring success, because they may have something written in the manifesto
or our plan
or whatever it is, right? It's a promise that they're making to show what their platform is and what they would like to do. Or
their blueprint for change, yeah.
Would like to do.
Yes.
Right? That policy is a broad thing, right? I don't know for any government that they've said for the 5 years that we are in office, what we want to see at the end of the 5 years is this as a result of these policies. So that's why I'm saying I don't know exactly how to say that whatever the outcomes are that we are seeing, if what we're seeing now is a desired outcome or are desired outcomes, or is this somewhere in the journey that they are hoping to get to? So that's what I'm saying, right? Now, to say that are we where we could be, just anecdotally, with the orange economy or the creative industries, I would say no, right? But that's from my observation. Do I think that there's progress being made? I would say yes. Is that progress? Who's driving that progress? I would say the private sector, right? Are there policies that are in place or being implemented to create an enabling environment for that success? Maybe. Don't know.
Matthew?
No, I appreciate Royanne's precision in the conversation and us not jumping to conclusions about what a assumed or perceived target may have been, right? But it is accurate to say I'm privy to information. I shouldn't even say privy. It makes it sound as if other people, like it's not public knowledge.
Right, yes, right.
It's just not common of policies beginning to be implemented. And I know there is a long history of rehashing work that has been done. And then it's the work of a committee basically not reaching the point of implementation. So there, and I agree with you, Quincy, we shouldn't make this political, but there's also the complication that we need to separate out actual intention from pure marketing. Not to sully the name of marketing, I'm a big fan. of political parties when they're running an election. You know, Mao could say anything. What is the actual intention here? Getting a committee together and getting all that hard work for basically free, that's pretty easy, right? But when the rubber meets the road, are they going to implement the policy? And I think that we could say, without knowing what specific promises are, the broad promise is, we want to grow this economy. Okay, there are agreed upon broad measures for economy. Is it growing? Is it growing because of the policy and the things that we've done, right? And I think it's fair to say, broadly, no. Like it's not happening. And the complaint that I have about that, because I really believe the private industry should be leading the way, but the complaint that I have is that the support that you mentioned earlier, that this government's role is not there. Like, there are no incentives for, like, I mean, go down the list. It doesn't even have to be in the cultural sector of the orange economy. Like, what special things help out architects or designers of advanced electronics, or, you know, whatever the IP is, right? I don't see any incentives from the policymakers. And I hear I'm getting away from the elected government, because government is continuous.
Yeah.
Being implemented to help that economy along. That's my particular perspective on it.
So I would say that there's progress being made. So let's go to from a policy perspective and a funding perspective, which is also, government can also play a role in that, right? So if you look at what's happening now, or the tools that are available through the Bahamas Development Bank, for example, there is a fund. They just had a launch for it. I think it's called C3 Fund.
Yes. Okay.
They just launched, but that is specifically to support businesses in the creative industries. And this is through the work that they're doing to develop the different areas of the economy: orange economy, blue economy, green economy. So there is some progress being made to that end, right? Because there's funds out there. There are development banks around the world that are willing to put funds towards developing particular industries in different countries, right? Because we have the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. So there's that. So you can see that there's some inroads being made to that end.
Because those things exist, or because those things have been implemented?
They've been implemented.
Who?
What do you mean?
You know people who've gotten loans from the Bahamas Development Bank under the C3 Fund?
What I'm saying is, when I say just launched, I mean like
months
it's like
ago.
it wasn't even months ago. It was like in the middle of July, right?
Fair enough.
So
yes.
here's the thing. Whether or not people have gotten loans, right? I don't know that. I don't know what the process is. I don't know what the lead time is. The point is that it's available, right? You could go on the website. There's criteria, so there's a process that you can follow. Right?
I'm pushing back only because we've seen that kind of thing.
We have? Where? Specifically for the creative industries?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where?
The Small Business Development Center, the Bahamas, before the C3 Fund, the Bahamas Development Bank had some programs focused on the creative industries. And I'm sure I remember from the Bahamas Entrepreneurial Venture Fund to focus on creative industries as well.
So with the SBDC, I think, remember, we had a conversation where they specifically did not have a focus on the creative industries. They welcomed everybody to submit, but there was not a focus on developing companies in the creative industry.
That was...
The other thing is, too, with the Bahamas Entrepreneurial Venture Fund, I mean, no shade to people who are taking these applications and meeting with the entrepreneurs, but you have to have people that understand exactly what the creative industries are and the type of support they need. And I would venture to say that those were not the resources available at the venture fund or SBDC. I did see recently, as in like this week, there was somebody that got a grant or a loan, whatever it was, from the SBDC, and that was for a theater company, right? And that made the papers. It's in the creative industries. But if you think through the roster of people that you've read about or companies that you've read about that got funding from either the venture fund or the creative or the SBDC, they weren't creative industries.
You're making my point.
How am I making your point? I feel like I just reinforced my point.
Well, perhaps then that your point and my point may not be as far apart as you seem to think.
Okay.
My only point is that the presence of a titled initiative, even if it is something that has a line item in somebody's budget somewhere, does not mean that those funds will actually be dispersed. And it does not mean that if those funds are dispersed, that the person or entity to whom those funds are dispersed get any more support than just the money. And one of our challenges is...
It could mean that, because I actually went to the launch where the person who's leading that initiative of the C3, they actually are very well versed in the creative industry, so they understand the type.
I'm not talking about this specific.
No, but I'm saying, right? We were talking about progress.
Yes.
So I'm saying that, going to my previous point, the venture fund and SBDC did not necessarily have people who understood the resources that are necessary for creative entrepreneurs.
So do you think this is a new chapter?
Yes.
Okay, so the trajectory is changing upward.
This is my point. So
Okay.
this is from, and that's what I know about from the government's perspective in terms of creating an enabling environment, right? I also know that the Bahamas Development Bank has been doing their research specifically on the creative industries. And that's one of the things that, for the most part, the government did not have. There's no empirical data on what the size of the industries is. Is there? Correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, there wasn't.
However, the work of people like Pam Burnside and there's an organization associated with her,
Creative Nassau.
They were one of the reasons that I mentioned the SBDC is because Creative Nassau and the Small Business Development Center were at the time that I left the SBDC.
Yeah.
They were hard at work trying to create some kind of a partnership, which was based on the empirical data, the research that Pam and her associates had done into the orange economy. So I don't think it's true to say that there's never been. Perhaps this might be.
It's not. When was that?
I left the SBDC in 2018. So it would have been around 2018.
Okay, so let me rephrase what I mean then. What I mean to say is that the government hasn't been using any data. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I hear you. I don't necessarily disagree.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of the argument, I think I would have to point out that the Access Accelerator Small Business Development Center is a semi-government agency. So just like the Bahamas Development Bank. So if you can say that the bank is the government using data, then you have to accept that the SBDC is also the government using data.
Sure, but specifically, in terms of creating policies that create an enabling environment based on data, right? What I mean, for example, if you tell me, okay, case in point, Alana Van Olsen, who owns Bahama Handprints, gave a presentation today that I listened to. She was there in person. And there was a question asked about Bahama handprints expanding to markets outside of the Bahamas, right?
Are we talking about specific companies on the show?
And that is your call.
Okay, keep going.
I mean,
Yeah, keep going.
yeah. Anyway,
I think I would let this one go for
Yeah.
sure.
it's an example, but
Yeah.
it's a real life example. It's not fictional. Yeah?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so
Maybe it was just
And
an
her-
excuse for me to get a drink, that's all.
yeah, well, but her reply was that it's like cost prohibitive to export
Mhm.
the product, right? This is a product that is, well, the fabric is imported, yes, but the prints that they use are Bahama handprint prints. The development that adds the value to the fabric is it's just plain cotton fabric, but they create the value by making a distinctive print, and then it's hand printed and it's sewn here, all that stuff. It's cost prohibitive to export, right? What data is the government using to say, right now, this industry is valued at X, right? It could be valued at Y. The gap there is where we need to create the policies. That's what I'm saying. So, as I understand it, the data that was done and collected by Creative Nassau is really looking at the types of industries and the businesses in those industries, right? But in terms of the data that is needed to create policies, and I mean from an economic perspective, in terms of it's valued at this. Maybe Creative Nassau did do that. I'm not sure. I don't recall.
Neither am
But I'm saying that I do not know that the government is using any sort of quantitative data
Right.
to develop policies. That's what I'm saying.
But to go back to your fundamental point, you believe that progress is being made.
I would say that progress is being made.
Right. And in terms of, again, given that you're a participant in the sector, as are both Matthew and myself in our own unique and either direct or indirect ways, what do you think the next step in terms of developing a thriving, quote unquote, orange economy in the Bahamas would be?
You have to have incubators. You have to have, first of all, it's increasing the awareness of all of the industries that comprise that kind of economy, right? So people need to understand you might want to be a gamer. You might want to develop games, like from a design perspective, a tech perspective, right? All of those industries are included in the orange economy. Do we have access to those things? Is there a plan to develop particular industries? What's the strategic plan to develop human capital that can work in those industries, right? That's
just this. I'm going to get shot for this, but there was a piece of legislation passed some years ago that was denigrated at the time it was passed by certain quarters, but the commercial industries.
Oh, this was the one that Brent Simonet worked on.
Right. And gaming and other creative industries were some of the primary areas in which people were supposed to be allowed to come in for transfer of technology or whatever the case may be. But the second the government changed, that
what happened with that?
that was repealed as quickly as they possibly could.
Yeah.
Because we don't want these foreigners in here.
Well, that was going to be my other point, right? I mean, in addition to creating that, in terms of like creating that enabling environment, because we have a very small population. We don't have like large industries aside from the major tourism industry, right? But you have to allow talent in order to train and then create those pathways for access to other markets, which just allow like more freedom of trade.
Yeah.
But so we have to think through like strategically how do we develop human capital to work in these industries, right? What's our goal 30 years from now in terms of how many people we want to work in the industry? What do we want the value of this industry to be in the Bahamas? Who can we trade with, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing.
One of the things that consistently blows my mind in the modern, like 21st century, like 2023 Bahamas, when I hear someone say something like what you just said, is the ability to cast my mind back to a time when Arthur Hanna, A.D. Hanna, was a minister of education, right before, there was a very brief moment in there. And he created a policy as a deputy prime minister, I think, called Bahamianization. And the whole point of Bahamianization was to bring in experts in critical areas where Bahamian expertise and knowledge was missing. Give those people work permits for a limited time. Make sure that they trained Bahamians, the infamous transfer of technology. And once they had trained up sufficient numbers of Bahamians, then you could tell them to thank you for your service. You may pack your Georgie bundle and go.
Yeah.
And then you will have created an entire class of newly trained, new experts who are native to the Bahamas, who are Bahamians, who can go forward and perpetuate these sectors. We created this situation where Bahamianization became bastardized, and what we thought it meant was all foreigners got to go. But what you just talked about is the entire purpose of Bahamianization, and to me, it's almost like we are back at 50 years ago from a policy and thinking perspective. 50 years ago, we were already at this point. Bring in foreigners, let them train Bahamians, send them on their way. What happened? We got 50 whole years between then and now.
Yeah.
And now here we are again. Okay, so what we should do, the smart thing to do, is bring in foreigners, let them train Bahamians, then send them on their way.
Yeah.
It drives me batshit crazy.
I can tell.
Yeah.
I'm going to sip my Jameson triple distilled Irish whiskey, and
that's kind of like that's where we are, right? You have to develop a pipeline, but you also need to have some type of goal in mind. But you need to understand like what is the current state, where do you want to go, and then how do you
and I think unfortunately that implies that priorities have to be drawn up, and you might be a creative, but your creative industry is not prioritized.
But okay, what I mean is that overall, from a government perspective, that's why there has to be the economic conversation about the industries, right? And I feel like that gets missed. I think you can look at the economics of Junkanoo, which Dr. Nicolette Bethel has done a lot of research on, and that's like a solid start. But understanding the industries as a whole, if you want to get support from the government in terms of prioritization, where does money go? Right? What has the highest potential to
and that may well
put jobs, could make jobs, and add to the GDP.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for our conversation on the radio. If you want to hear the rest of the conversation, the podcast is hosted on Guardian Talk Radio's website. That's www.guardiantalkradio. And you can go to the podcast pull-down menu and look up the Sunday Scotch Society with K. Quincy Parker, and you'll find all the episodes of the Sunday Scotch Society there for you to listen to and share with your friends. And make sure you join us next week for the Sunday Scotch Society with me, your host, K. Quincy Parker. See you next week.